Captain Jake Morrison stared at the screen in front of him, watching the stars drift past as the horizon's edge moved through empty space. The survey mission had been quiet so far, exactly the kind of boring work that paid well but made the days feel long. He stretched in his chair and checked the time. Another 6 hours until they reached the next checkpoint. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange on the sensors," Ben Carter said from the pilot's seat. His hands moved across the controls, bringing up a new display. "It's big, really big." Jake sat up straight. "Show me." The main screen changed, and Jake felt his stomach drop. A massive ship appeared in front of them, easily 10 times the size of the horizon's edge. It had a strange design, all smooth curves and pale metal that seemed to glow with its own light. He had never seen anything like it. "Try to hail them," Jake ordered. "Let them know we're a peaceful survey vessel." Ben worked the communications panel, sending out standard greeting messages in multiple languages. Nothing came back. The alien ship just sat there in space, silent and waiting. "Getting some weird readings here," Nicole Hayes called out from the engineering station. "That ship is putting out some kind of field. It's surrounding us." Jake opened his mouth to order evasive maneuvers, but it was already too late. The horizon's edge shuddered, and every system on the ship went dark at once. Emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in red. Jake grabbed his armrests as he felt the ship lurch sideways. "We're being pulled in," Ben shouted. "I've got no control." Jake hit the intercom button. "Lisa, Greg, get to the bridge now. We've got a situation." Medical Officer Lisa Grant and Security Officer Greg Palmer rushed onto the bridge within seconds. Both of them looked at the massive alien ship on the screen, and their faces went pale. "What do we do?" Lisa asked. "We stay calm," Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We're explorers, not warriors. Maybe they just want to talk." The horizon's edge was pulled into a docking bay inside the alien vessel. Through the windows, the crew could see the bay was enormous, filled with strange equipment and blinking lights. Figures moved in the shadows, tall and thin, unlike any species they had encountered before. "Everyone grab a weapon," Greg said, moving to the weapons locker. "Just in case." "No," Jake said firmly. "We go out unarmed. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. Weapons will just make this worse." The crew gathered at the airlock. Jake could see the tension in their faces, the way Ben kept clenching and unclenching his fists, how Nicole kept checking her equipment belt as if looking for something to hold on to. Lisa stood close to Greg, who kept his shoulders squared and ready. The airlock opened with a hiss. Standing outside were 3 aliens, each one 7 feet tall but impossibly thin. Their skin was a pale blue color, and they moved with careful, deliberate motions. Their eyes were large and dark, taking up much of their faces. One of the aliens stepped forward and touched a device on its chest. A voice came out speaking perfect English. "You will come with us. Do not resist." "Who are you?" Jake demanded. "Why have you taken our ship?" "I am Thralkson, lead researcher of this facility. You have been selected for scientific study. Your species is new to us, and we wish to understand your biological parameters." Jake felt anger rising in his chest. "We're not lab rats. We're people. This is kidnapping." Thralkson tilted his head in what might have been confusion. "Your consent is not required. The pursuit of knowledge supersedes individual concerns. You will not be permanently harmed." "Like hell we will," Greg said, stepping forward. One of the other aliens raised a device and pointed it at Greg. There was a flash of light and Greg collapsed, his body twitching on the floor. "Greg!" Lisa dropped to her knees beside him, checking his pulse. "He's alive, just unconscious. You will cooperate, or we will render you all unconscious and proceed anyway," Thralkson said calmly. "The choice is yours, but the outcome remains the same." Jake looked at his crew. Ben was helping Lisa with Greg, while Nicole stared at the aliens with pure fury in her eyes. They were outmatched and outnumbered. Fighting now would be stupid. "We'll cooperate," Jake said through gritted teeth. "But this isn't over. When Earth finds out what you've done—" "Your planet's authorities are irrelevant," Thralkson interrupted. "This facility is far from any patrol routes. By the time anyone discovers your absence, our research will be complete, and you will be returned to your vessel with no memory of these events." More aliens entered the docking bay, carrying what looked like medical equipment. They loaded Greg onto a floating stretcher and gestured for the others to follow. The crew had no choice but to walk deeper into the alien facility. The corridors were all white and sterile, lit with a soft light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Everything was oversized, built for beings much taller than humans. The aliens moved quietly, their footsteps barely making a sound. They passed through several doors that opened automatically. Through windows in the walls, Jake could see other rooms filled with equipment he didn't recognize. Some rooms had what looked like examination tables. Others had tanks filled with colored liquid. One room had cages, though they appeared empty. Finally, they arrived at a large chamber with 5 separate cells, each one made of some kind of transparent material. The aliens directed each crew member to a different cell. Jake tried to stay close to his people, but the aliens separated them efficiently. "What are you going to do to us?" Nicole demanded as an alien pushed her toward a cell. "We will conduct tests," Thralkson replied. "Your species shows interesting biological markers. We wish to measure your tolerances and limitations. It is standard procedure for all new species we encounter." "How many species have you done this to?" Lisa asked, her voice shaking slightly. 47 so far, Thralkson said, as if he were discussing the weather. "You are number 48. The cells sealed shut with a soft hum. Jake immediately went to the transparent wall and pressed his hands against it. It was smooth and cool to the touch. He could see his crew in their own cells, all of them looking scared and angry. "Listen to me," Jake called out, hoping they could hear him. "Stay strong. We'll get through this." Thralkson approached Jake's cell, studying him with those large, dark eyes. "Your species is quite small compared to most we have studied. Your physical structure appears fragile. This research should not take long." Jake stared back at the alien, keeping his face blank. "You're making a big mistake." The lights in Jake's cell brightened suddenly, pulling him from an uneasy sleep. He didn't know how long he had been there. There were no windows, no clocks, nothing to mark the passage of time. His body ached from sleeping on the hard floor. The transparent wall of his cell suddenly became opaque, blocking his view of the others. Jake jumped to his feet and pounded on the wall. "Hey, what's going on?" No answer came. He heard a sound from somewhere else in the facility, a door opening, footsteps, then nothing. Minutes passed. The silence was worse than any noise. Then he heard Lisa scream. Jake threw himself at the wall, trying to break through, but it was useless. The material didn't even crack. "Lisa! Lisa, talk to me!" Her scream cut off abruptly. Jake pressed his ear against the wall, trying to hear anything, but the cells were soundproof. His heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to help her, to do something, anything, but he was trapped. Hours passed. At least, Jake thought it was hours. The wall remained opaque. He sat down, then stood up, then sat down again. His mind raced with terrible possibilities. What were they doing to Lisa? What would they do to the rest of them? Finally, the wall became transparent again. Jake rushed to it and looked across at Lisa's cell. She was there, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall. Her face was red and covered in sweat. She looked exhausted but alive. "Lisa!" Jake shouted. "Can you hear me?" She looked up at him and nodded weakly. She couldn't speak through the soundproof barrier, but she held up her hand in a gesture that said she was okay. Jake felt relief flood through him. followed immediately by anger. Whatever they had done to her, he would make them pay for it. The next day, or what Jake assumed was the next day, they came for Ben. The pilot was pulled from his cell by several aliens, while the rest of the crew watched helplessly. Ben struggled against them, but the aliens were stronger than they looked. He disappeared through a door, and the walls became opaque again. When Ben returned, he looked worse than Lisa. His skin had an odd color to it, pale in some places and flushed in others. He collapsed on the floor of his cell and didn't move for a long time. Jake watched him through the transparent wall, feeling helpless and furious. Nicole was next. She went quietly, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. She was gone longer than the others. When she finally came back, she was limping. Her clothes were soaked with sweat, and she fell onto the floor of her cell and just lay there, breathing hard. Greg was taken after that. The security officer tried to fight back when the aliens came for him. He managed to punch one of them, and the alien went down immediately, making a high-pitched sound that might have been pain. But 3 more aliens appeared with those stunning devices, and Greg was unconscious before he hit the ground. They dragged him out. When Greg came back, he was different. He wasn't unconscious anymore, but something was wrong. His face was blank, his eyes unfocused. He sat in his cell and stared at nothing. Jake called out to him, but Greg didn't respond. It was like he was there, but not there at the same time. Then it was Jake's turn. 4 aliens entered his cell. Thralkson was among them. The lead researcher carried a tablet-like device and was reading from it. "Captain Morrison," Thralkson said through his translator, "you will come with us now. We have completed preliminary testing on your crew members, and the results are quite unusual. We need to verify our findings." "What did you do to them?" Jake demanded. "Greg looks like he's in shock." He experienced significant neural stimulation. His recovery is proceeding normally. "All of your crew members are within acceptable parameters." "Acceptable to who?" Jake stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You can't just experiment on people like this. It's wrong." Thralkson tilted his head. "Wrong is a subjective concept. Science requires observation and measurement. Your species is unknown to us. We must understand your capabilities and limitations. This is how knowledge is gained. There are other ways to learn about us. You could have just asked. Self-reported data is unreliable. Direct measurement is the only valid method." Thralkson gestured to the other aliens. "You will cooperate, or we will sedate you. The testing will proceed either way." Jake looked at the aliens surrounding him. They were tall and thin, and up close he could see how delicate they seemed. Their movements were careful and precise, like they were afraid of breaking something. Their skin looked almost translucent, and he could see what might have been veins beneath the surface. An idea started to form in his mind, but now wasn't the time. He needed more information first. "Fine," Jake said. "I'll cooperate, but I want to know what you're testing for." "We measure pain tolerance, endurance, environmental adaptation, and physical limitations," Thralkson explained as they walked down the corridor. "Your crew members have shown unexpected results. According to our data, they should have reached their breaking points much sooner than they did." They entered a large room filled with equipment. In the center was a chamber with thick walls and a small window. The aliens directed Jake inside. The chamber was bare except for vents in the floor and ceiling. "We will begin with temperature tolerance," Thralkson said. His voice came through a speaker in the wall. "Most species can endure a temperature range of approximately 15 degrees before experiencing significant distress. We will measure your threshold." The chamber began to get cold. Jake felt the temperature drop rapidly, his breath starting to fog in the air. He wrapped his arms around himself and stamped his feet to keep the blood moving. The cold bit into his skin, making his fingers and toes go numb. Through the window, he could see the aliens watching their instruments. Thralkson seemed particularly focused on one display. The alien kept looking from the screen to Jake and back again, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The cold got worse. Jake's teeth chattered and his whole body shook. He wanted to pound on the door and demand they stop, but he refused to give them the satisfaction. Lisa had endured this. Ben had survived it. He could too. Time stretched on. The cold was painful now, a deep ache in his bones. His skin felt like it was being stabbed with thousands of tiny needles. But he stayed on his feet, moving constantly to keep from freezing in place. Just when Jake thought he couldn't take any more, the temperature started to rise. The relief was immediate, but brief. The chamber didn't stop at comfortable. It kept getting hotter. Soon Jake was sweating, his shirt sticking to his back. The air felt thick and hard to breathe. The heat climbed higher. Jake pulled off his shirt, but it didn't help. The air itself felt like it was burning his lungs. Sweat poured down his face and body. He could feel his heart racing, his head starting to pound. Through the window, he saw Thralkson gesturing urgently at the other aliens. They seemed to be arguing about something. One of them kept pointing at a display, while Thralkson shook his head in what looked like disbelief. Finally, the temperature began to drop back to normal. The door opened, and Jake stumbled out, gasping for air. His legs felt weak, and his vision was blurred with sweat. One of the aliens tried to steady him, but Jake jerked away from the touch. "Remarkable," Thralkson said, staring at his tablet. "You maintained consciousness through temperature variations that should have rendered you comatose. Your species has an extraordinary tolerance for environmental extremes." "We're tougher than we look," Jake managed to say between breaths. "So it would seem." Thralkson made some notes on his device. "But we must verify this across multiple parameters. Take him to the pressure chamber." They put Jake in another room, this one with thick metal walls. He felt a change in the air immediately, a pressure building in his ears. It got worse quickly, like he was diving deep underwater. His ears popped painfully, and his head felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. Jake gritted his teeth and tried to equalize the pressure by swallowing repeatedly. It helped a little, but not much. The pain in his head grew stronger. He could feel blood vessels throbbing in Jake lay on the floor of his cell, his body still aching from the tests. His mind wouldn't stop working, turning over everything he had observed. The aliens were advanced. Their technology far beyond anything humans had developed. But technology wasn't everything. He thought about the way they moved, so careful and precise. The way that single punch from Greg had dropped one of them like a stone, the way they used devices to sedate prisoners instead of physical force. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. They were physically weak. A soft tapping sound broke through his thoughts. Jake sat up and looked around. The tapping came again, a pattern of sounds against the wall. He moved closer and listened carefully. It was Ben, in the next cell over, tapping some kind of message. Jake smiled despite his pain. Morse code. They had all learned it during their training, just in case communication systems failed. He had almost forgotten about it. He tapped back a simple response. "I hear you." Ben's message came through slowly but clearly. "We need plan. Notice aliens weak." Jake tapped back. "Agreed." Watching them. Learning. Over the next several hours, they used the tapping system to share observations. Nicole had noticed the aliens flinched at loud noises. Lisa, with her medical training, pointed out how carefully they moved their own limbs, as if afraid of injury. Greg reported that when he had hit the alien, it had felt like punching something hollow, with bones that gave way too easily. They were building a picture of their captors. The Velkari were advanced in technology, but had clearly never faced physical conflict. Their bodies weren't built for it. That gave the humans an advantage, but they would need to be smart about using it. The cell walls became opaque again. Jake tensed, wondering who they would take next. But this time, something different happened. A voice came through a speaker in the ceiling, speaking English through a translator. You will all be taken to a communal testing chamber. Do not attempt to resist. Cooperation will make the process easier. Jake's heart rate picked up. They were going to put the whole crew together. This might be their only chance. He tapped out a quick message to Ben. "Be ready! This is our shot." The cell doors opened simultaneously. Aliens entered each cell, multiple guards for each human. They were taking no chances after Greg's earlier resistance. Jake allowed himself to be escorted out, keeping his eyes down but observing everything. They were led through the corridors to a much larger chamber than before. It was circular, with high ceilings and various pieces of equipment lining the walls. In the center was an open space with markings on the floor. Through a wide window, Jake could see Thralkson and several other aliens preparing their instruments. The 5 crew members were brought together in the center of the chamber. It was the first time they had been able to stand together since their capture. Jake caught each person's eye, trying to communicate without words. They all understood. Something was about to happen. The guards left the chamber, sealing the door behind them. Thralkson's voice came through the speakers. "This test will measure your species' social cohesion under stress. Most species become hostile to their own kind when subjected to multiple simultaneous stressors. We will observe your behavior as conditions deteriorate." "They think we'll turn on each other," Lisa whispered. "Not a chance," Greg muttered. The chamber began to change. The temperature started to drop rapidly. At the same time, Jake felt pressure building in his ears again. Lights began to flash at irregular intervals, bright enough to hurt. And underneath it all, a high-pitched sound started, so faint at first that he almost didn't notice it, but growing steadily louder and more painful. The crew instinctively moved closer together, forming a tight circle. When Ben started to shiver from the cold, Nicole pressed against his side to share body heat. When the pressure made Lisa dizzy, Greg steadied her with an arm around her shoulders. They faced outward in their circle, protecting each other's backs. "This is nothing," Jake said, loud enough for his crew to hear over the noise. "We've been through worse than this. Remember that training mission in Alaska? This is practically a vacation compared to that." "The one where we had to march 20 miles in a blizzard," Ben said, managing a weak laugh. "Yeah, I remember. My toes didn't feel normal for a week." "Or that time in the desert," Nicole added, "when the cooling system broke and we had to make repairs in 120-degree heat." They kept talking, sharing memories, reminding each other that they had survived difficult things before. The conversation helped distract from the pain and discomfort. It reminded them that they were more than just test subjects. They were a team. Through the window, Jake could see the aliens becoming agitated. Thralkson was gesturing at his instruments, clearly confused by what he was seeing. The other aliens crowded around the displays, all of them focused on the data. The conditions in the chamber got worse. The temperature dropped below freezing. The pressure increased until Jake's head felt like it would explode. The flashing lights came faster, and then a new element was added: pain. It started as a tingling sensation all over Jake's body, then quickly grew into something more intense. It felt like electricity running through his nerves, not enough to cause real damage, but more than enough to hurt. His muscles tightened involuntarily. He heard gasps from his crew as they experienced the same thing. But they didn't break apart. They held on to each other tighter. When the pain came in waves, they counted through it together. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. It was a simple technique, but it worked. It gave them something to focus on besides the pain. Lisa, her medical training kicking in even through her own suffering, started talking them through controlled breathing. In through your nose, slow count of 4, hold for 4, out through your mouth for 4. It helps manage the pain response. You're doing great, everyone. Just keep breathing. The aliens watching them seemed unable to process what they were seeing. Thralaxon kept checking his equipment as if convinced it must be malfunctioning. The data didn't match their expectations at all. Jake used the chaos to study the chamber more carefully. His eyes swept across the walls, noting the placement of equipment, the locations of vents and panels. There, near the door they had entered through, he spotted something interesting. A control panel, partially visible behind a transparent cover. It was positioned at what would be a comfortable height for the tall Velkari, but it was still within reach. He committed the location to memory. Then he looked at the door mechanism itself. It appeared to be a simple sliding door, probably operated by pressure sensors or simple touch controls. The Velkari had designed everything for their own use, never imagining that their test subjects might try to escape. Why would they? Every other species they had tested must have been broken by this point, unable to think clearly enough to plan an escape. But humans were different. Pain didn't shut down their brains the same way. They could function through it, even think strategically. The torture continued for what felt like hours. At some point, Greg's legs gave out, and he started to collapse. Jake and Ben immediately supported his weight, keeping him upright. When Nicole started to cry from the pain, Lisa squeezed her hand and told her it was okay to cry, that tears didn't mean weakness. Finally, mercifully, the conditions began to normalize. The temperature rose back to comfortable levels. The pressure equalized. The lights stopped flashing, and the painful sensation faded away. The crew remained huddled together, exhausted and shaking, but still standing, still together. The door opened. Thralaxon entered with several guards. The lead researcher approached slowly, staring at them with those huge dark eyes. He seemed genuinely shaken by what he had witnessed. "Extraordinary," he said quietly. "Every other species we have tested responds to these conditions with aggression toward their fellow captives, fighting over resources, turning on the weak to preserve themselves, but you did the opposite. You protected each other, supported each other. How is this possible?" Jake looked at the alien, weighing his words carefully. This was important. He needed to keep them talking, keep them off balance. "Because we're not individuals," Jake said. "We're a crew, a team. Where we come from, survival depends on cooperation. We learned a long time ago that we're stronger together than apart." Fascinating. Thralaxon made notes on his device. This behavior must be documented fully. We will need to conduct additional tests to understand the mechanism behind this social bonding. "More tests?" Lisa said, her voice weak but angry. "How much more do you need?" "As much as necessary to complete our understanding." Thralaxon looked at each of them in turn. "Your species is unlike any we have encountered. The Council must see this data. They will want to know everything about you." The guards moved forward to separate the crew again. Jake let them take his arms without resistance, but his mind was working fast. He had learned several crucial things during this test. First, the humans could endure far more than the aliens expected. Second, working together made them even stronger. And third, the aliens were so focused on their data that they weren't thinking about security. As they were led back to their cells, Jake caught Ben's eye and gave him the slightest nod. Ben understood. The next time they had a chance, they would be ready. They just needed the right opportunity. Back in his cell, Jake sat down and flexed his hands. Every muscle ached, his head throbbed. The lingering effects of the neural pain made his skin feel raw and sensitive, but he was alive and thinking clearly. That was what mattered. He thought about what Thralaxon had said. The aliens had tested 47 other species before humans. None of them had responded the way humans had. That meant the Velkari had a very specific idea of how sapient beings behaved under stress. They expected fear, aggression, self-preservation at the cost of others. Jake spent the next period working on his plan. He didn't know if it was hours or days, because time had lost all meaning in the cell. But he used every moment to prepare himself mentally. He stretched to keep his muscles loose. He practiced deep breathing to control his heart rate, and he went over every detail of the escape route in his mind until he could see it perfectly with his eyes closed. The tapping code became their lifeline. When the aliens weren't watching, the crew communicated through the walls. Jake explained his plan in simple terms. They would wait for another group test. When they were all together in the chamber, Jake would make his move. The others needed to be ready to follow his lead immediately. Ben tapped back concerns about the guards. Nicole worried about the weapons the aliens carried. Lisa questioned whether they could really overpower beings so much taller than them. But Greg's response was simple and clear. We have no choice. We go or we die here. That settled it. They would escape or die trying. Anything was better than spending the rest of their lives as lab animals. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The cell doors opened again, and the same voice spoke through the speakers. You will be taken to the communal chamber for further observation. We have additional tests to conduct. Jake's pulse quickened, but he kept his face calm. This was it. He allowed the guards to escort him out, walking with his head down like a defeated prisoner. Around him, his crew did the same. Only someone watching very carefully would have noticed the tension in their shoulders, the readiness in their movements. They were led back to the large circular chamber. This time, there were more aliens watching from behind the window. The council members, Jake guessed. They had come to see the strange humans for themselves. The crew was positioned in the center again. The guards left and sealed the door. Thralkson's voice came through the speakers. We will repeat the previous test with increased intensity. The council wishes to verify our findings. Prepare yourselves. But Jake wasn't preparing for the test. His eyes were locked on the control panel near the door. He had spent all this time visualizing this moment, planning every movement. Now it was time to act. The chamber began to change. Cold air poured in from the vents. The pressure started to build. But before the test could really begin, Jake moved. He held up his left hand and looked at his thumb. What he was about to do would hurt, but pain was temporary. Freedom was worth it. He had practiced the motion in his cell, getting the angle right in his mind. Now, he executed it perfectly. Jake grabbed his left thumb with his right hand and yanked it sharply to the side. There was a pop as the joint dislocated. Pain shot up his arm, bright and sharp. He bit down on his tongue to keep from crying out. But it worked. With his thumb dislocated, his hand was narrower. He could slip it free from the restraint device on his wrist that he hadn't even known was there until he tested its limits earlier. The device clattered to the floor. Before the aliens could react, Jake sprinted to the control panel. His crew understood immediately and followed him. The panel was covered by a thin, transparent shield, designed to protect it from accidental damage. For the delicate Velkari, it would be difficult to break. For a human who had grown up on a heavy-gravity world, it was nothing. Jake slammed his elbow into the shield. It cracked. He hit it again and it shattered. His arm was bleeding, but he ignored it. His fingers found the door controls, simple touch-sensitive pads arranged in a pattern. Alarms started blaring. Through the window, Jake could see the aliens jumping up in panic. Thralkson was shouting something, pointing at them. Guards were rushing toward the chamber door. Which one? Jake shouted at the panel. There were multiple buttons, each with alien symbols he couldn't read. Try them all! Nicole yelled. Jake started pressing buttons rapidly. One made the lights flicker. Another activated some kind of mist from the ceiling. The third one made a loud noise. The fourth one opened the door. The crew rushed out into the corridor just as the guards arrived. There were 5 aliens, each one tall and carrying one of those stunning devices. For a moment, everyone froze, humans and aliens staring at each other. Then Greg charged. The security officer had been waiting for this chance since they were captured. He crashed into the nearest guard with his shoulder, and the alien went down hard, making that high-pitched shriek of pain. The stunning device flew from its hands and skittered across the floor. The other guards raised their weapons, but Ben was already moving. He grabbed the dropped device and aimed it at the nearest alien. There was a flash of light, and the guard collapsed. Ben kept firing, dropping 2 more guards before they could react. The remaining aliens turned and ran. They actually ran away from the humans, their long legs carrying them down the corridor at surprising speed. "Grab their weapons," Jake ordered, scooping up one of the devices. They were lighter than he expected, designed for the Valkyries' weak grip strength. Lisa helped Greg to his feet. "Are you okay?" "Never better," Greg said, though he was breathing hard. The tackle had hurt him too, but he was grinning. "Did you see how easy they went down? It's like hitting something made of sticks." They ran down the corridor, following the route Jake had memorized. Behind them, alarms continued to wail. Doors were starting to seal automatically, security protocols kicking in. But the doors were slow, designed for a species that never had to deal with emergencies involving physical violence. They made it through 3 sections before encountering more guards. This time there were more of them, maybe 10 aliens blocking the corridor ahead. They had formed a line, all holding stunning devices. "Get back!" one of them shouted through a translator. "You cannot escape. You will be sedated and returned to your cells." Jake raised his own captured weapon. "Let us pass and nobody gets hurt." "You cannot harm us. You are test subjects. It is not permitted." "Watch us," Nicole growled. The aliens fired first. Stunning beams shot down the corridor. The humans scattered, diving behind equipment and structural supports. The beams hit the walls, leaving scorch marks on the pristine white surfaces. But the aliens weren't soldiers. They didn't know how to fight. They fired wildly, without any coordination or strategy. The humans, even with minimal combat training, were far more effective. Greg leaned out from cover and fired at the aliens' feet, forcing them to jump back. Ben circled around through a side passage and came at them from an angle. Jake and Nicole provided covering fire while Lisa looked for another route. "There!" Lisa pointed to a ventilation grate. "We can go through there." "It's too small," Ben said. "For them, maybe. Not for us." She was right. The grate was designed for Valkyrie access, and the Valkyrie were tall but thin. The humans could fit through more easily. Nicole pulled the grate off using a piece of pipe she had grabbed from the floor. One by one, they crawled into the ventilation system. The vents were cramped and dark, but they provided cover from the stunning weapons. The humans could hear the aliens below them, communicating in their own language, clearly confused about where the prisoners had gone. They crawled through the vents for what felt like forever. Jake's dislocated thumb throbbed with every movement, but he pushed the pain to the back of his mind. They had to keep moving. Finally, they emerged in a familiar area, the docking bay. Through the grate, Jake could see the horizon's edge sitting exactly where they had left it. There were only 2 guards watching it, both of them looking nervous and unprepared. The crew dropped down from the vent one at a time. The guards saw them and raised their weapons, but they were too slow. Greg and Ben tackled them before they could fire. The aliens went down easily, and this time the humans used their own restraint devices to tie them up. "Everyone on the ship now," Jake ordered. They ran up the boarding ramp. Ben went straight to the pilot's seat and started the startup sequence. Nicole headed to engineering to get the power systems online. Lisa checked their medical supplies while Greg secured the airlock. Jake sat in the captain's chair and accessed the communications system. They needed to call for help, to let other humans know what was happening here. But before he could send a signal, the ship lurched. Something had grabbed them, the same tractor beam that had pulled them in before. "They're trying to pull us back in," Ben shouted from the pilot station. "The engines aren't strong enough to break free." Jake looked out the window. He could see Thralkson in the bay, standing at a control panel. The alien was activating the tractor beam manually, his long fingers moving across the controls. There was no time to think. Jake grabbed one of the stunning weapons and ran back down the boarding ramp. Thrallaxon saw him coming and tried to adjust the controls faster, but he was panicking, his movements clumsy. Jake aimed the weapon at the control panel and fired. The device exploded in a shower of sparks. The tractor beam shut off immediately. The horizon's edge was free. Thrallaxon stared at Jake across the docking bay. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The alien seemed shocked, unable to process what had happened. His test subjects had escaped. His research station was in chaos. Everything he thought he knew about humans had been proven wrong. "You studied our pain tolerance," Jake said, breathing hard. "But you never stopped to think about what that really meant. We come from a hard world. We had to be tough to survive. And that toughness isn't just the horizon's edge raced through space, putting as much distance as possible between them and the Velkari research station." Ben kept the engines at maximum, pushing the ship harder than recommended. None of them cared about safety protocols right now. They just wanted to get away. "I'm sending out a distress signal," Jake said, working the communications panel with his good hand. His left thumb was still dislocated, swollen to twice its normal size. "Broadcasting on all frequencies. Someone should pick it up soon." "How's everyone doing?" Lisa asked, moving through the ship to check on each crew member. She had already wrapped Jake's thumb and given him something for the pain. Now she was examining the cuts and bruises on the others. "I'll live," Greg said. He had the worst injuries from tackling the guards, but he was smiling despite the pain. That felt good, you know. Finally fighting back after all that helplessness. Nicole nodded from her position at the engineering station. "I never want to feel that powerless again. Being trapped in those cells, tested like animals. It was worse than any physical pain." "We survived," Ben said quietly. "That's what matters. We survived something that probably killed other species. Those aliens had tested 47 species before us. I wonder how many of them made it out." The question hung in the air, heavy and dark. Jake had been thinking about the same thing. The Velkari had mentioned other species, other tests. What had happened to them? Were they still trapped in that station? Or had they died during the experiments? "We'll tell everyone what we saw," Jake said firmly. "The Galactic Union needs to know what the Velkari are doing. This wasn't research. It was torture." 3 hours later, a human patrol ship picked up their distress signal. The captain of the patrol vessel, Commander Williams, listened in growing horror as Jake explained what had happened. Within minutes, Williams had called for backup and set course for the research station's last known position. "Don't go in alone," Jake warned. "Get a full fleet. The Velkari have advanced technology, and they won't want this information getting out." "Already on it," Williams replied. "I'm contacting Earth Command now. They'll want to hear this directly from you." The next few days passed in a blur. The Horizon's Edge was escorted back to the nearest human station, where medical teams were waiting. Jake's thumb was properly set and treated. The cuts and bruises on all of them were examined and documented. But the psychological evaluations took longer. The doctors wanted to make sure they were mentally stable after their ordeal. "You're all showing signs of trauma," Dr. Patterson told them during one session. "That's normal and expected. What you went through was horrific, but I'm also seeing something else. Resilience. You supported each other through the worst of it, and that bond probably saved your lives." "It definitely saved our lives," Lisa said. "Without each other, we would have broken. That's what the aliens expected. But they didn't understand that humans are social creatures. We need each other." Meanwhile, Earth Command was assembling a response fleet, 5 ships, fully armed with diplomatic representatives from the human government. They arrived at the nebula where the Velkari station was hidden. And what they found shocked everyone. The station was still there, but it had changed. When the human fleet approached, Dozens of smaller Velkari ships emerged from the station, but they didn't attack. Instead, they transmitted a message of surrender. Thralkson himself spoke for the Velkari scientists. Through the translation systems, his voice sounded tired and defeated. "We acknowledge our error. We violated the rights of sapient beings in pursuit of knowledge. We did not understand the nature of what we were studying. We request the opportunity to make amends." The human diplomatic team, led by Ambassador Collins, was cautious. "You kidnapped and tortured members of our species. You admitted to doing the same to 47 other species. Why should we believe you're sincere?" "Because we learned," Thralkson replied. "Not from data or measurements, but from direct experience. When your crew members escaped, they could have killed many of us easily. We are fragile compared to you. But they chose not to. They used only the minimum force necessary. They showed us restraint that we did not show them." There was a long pause. Then Thralkson continued. "We also learned about our own limitations. We studied pain tolerance as an abstract concept, never truly understanding what it meant. We thought we were objective scientists, but we were causing real suffering to real beings. The humans taught us that lesson in a way we cannot forget." Ambassador Collins consulted with his team. Jake and his crew were patched into the communication channel, listening to everything. They had earned the right to be part of these discussions. "What about the other species you tested?" Jake demanded, unable to stay silent. "Where are they?" "Most were returned to their homeworlds with their memories suppressed, as we had planned to do with you. We can provide the locations and species identifications. Some did not survive the testing. For those, we can only offer our profound regret and whatever restitution their people demand." The humans conferred. This was bigger than just their crew now. This was a galactic incident that could spark war or create new alliances, depending on how it was handled. In the end, the decision was made to bring the matter before the Galactic Union Council. The Velkari would face justice for their actions. Their research station would be shut down. All their data on the tested species would be released publicly. But there would be no war. The humans, despite having the advantage of physical strength, chose diplomacy. As Ambassador Collins explained, "We could crush them easily, but that would make us no better than them. Instead, we'll let the law handle this." The Velkari Scientific Council was dissolved. Thralkson and the other lead researchers faced trial before the Galactic Union. They were found guilty of crimes against sapient beings and sentenced to long periods of community service, helping to rehabilitate the species they had harmed. The trial became famous across the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humans before suddenly knew all about them. The story of 5 humans escaping from an advanced research facility spread far and wide. But it wasn't just the escape that impressed other species. It was the restraint the humans had shown. They could have killed their captors easily. Instead, they had focused on escape and then on justice through proper channels. Jake and his crew became reluctant celebrities. They gave interviews, testified before councils, and helped identify some of the other species that had been tested. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but they knew it was important. Months later, when everything finally settled down, the crew of the Horizon's Edge was back together on their ship. They had been offered new positions, promotions, fancy jobs with big titles. But they had all turned them down. They wanted to stay together, to continue exploring space as a crew. "After everything we went through," Nicole said during their first mission briefing back, "I can't imagine working with anyone else. You all saw me at my worst and still had my back." "That's what crews do," Ben said simply. "We take care of each other." They were heading back out into deep space, back to surveying unknown sectors. But things were different now. The crew moved with more confidence. They had faced something terrible and survived. They knew what they were capable of. Jake sat in his captain's chair, looking at the stars ahead. His thumb had healed, though it would never be quite the same. The scars on his arm from breaking the shield had faded but were still visible, physical reminders of what they had endured. "Captain," Lisa said from her station, "I've been thinking about what Thralkson said during the trial, about how they studied pain tolerance but never understood what it really meant." "What about it?" "I think he was right. Pain tolerance isn't just about enduring suffering, it's about having a reason to endure. We pushed through because we had each other, because we wanted to get home, because we refused to give up. The Velkari measured our biology but missed the psychology behind it." Jake nodded slowly. "That's what makes humans dangerous, I guess. It's not that we can take a beating. It's that we can take a beating and keep coming back for more. We're stubborn like that." "Stubborn and loyal," Greg added. "Don't forget loyal. I would have died in that facility for any of you. And I know you would have done the same for me." It was true. They had proven it to themselves and to the galaxy. Humans weren't the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced, but they had something special. They had the ability to endure, to adapt, and to support each other through the worst conditions imaginable. Back on the Velkari homeworld, in a small office far from the empty research station, Thralkson worked on his final report. His career as a lead scientist was over. His reputation was destroyed, but he had learned something valuable, even if the cost had been terrible. He wrote slowly, choosing each word with care. This report would be studied by future generations of Velkari, a warning about the dangers of treating other beings as mere subjects for research. "We sought to measure human pain tolerance through scientific observation," he wrote. "We succeeded in gathering extensive data. The humans can endure temperature extremes, pressure changes, and neural pain that would incapacitate most known species. But the true lesson we learned cannot be measured in numbers." He paused, remembering the moment when Jake Morrison had confronted him in the docking bay. The human had been injured, exhausted, and clearly in pain. But his eyes had been sharp and focused, burning with determination. "Pain tolerance is not merely a biological trait," Thralkson continued writing. "It is a survival adaptation that reflects a species' history. Humans evolved on a world that tested them constantly. They learned to push through suffering because giving up meant death. This created not just physical resilience, but mental toughness." He thought about how easily the humans had overcome the Velkari guards, not because they were violent or cruel, but because they were simply more durable. What would cause a Velkari serious injury was barely an inconvenience to a human. "We studied their pain tolerance from a position of comfort and safety," he wrote. "Then we learned what it felt like to be on the receiving end. Even the gentlest physical contact from a human caused us significant distress. We learned in the most direct way possible that pain tolerance is not just about what one can endure. It is about what one becomes capable of when there is no other choice." Thralkson finished his report and submitted it to the Galactic Union archives. It would stand as his final contribution to science, a warning wrapped in shame and hard-won wisdom. Across the galaxy, on dozens of worlds, the story of the humans and the Velkari spread. It became a cautionary tale told in many forms. Some species saw it as proof that humans were dangerous and should be approached with caution. Others saw it as evidence that humans could be powerful allies, capable of enduring what others could not. But the humans themselves didn't see themselves as special. They were just people trying to survive in a vast galaxy. They had been tested, tortured, and pushed to their limits, and they had done what humans had always done throughout their history. They had endured, they had adapted, they had survived, and they had taught the galaxy a lesson that would not soon be forgotten. Never mistake pain tolerance for weakness, because the species that can endure the most suffering is often the species you least want to fight. The Horizon's Edge continued its journey through space, its crew closer than ever. Behind them, they left a changed galaxy, one that now understood a little more about humanity. Ahead of them lay new discoveries, new adventures, and new challenges. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Because that was what humans did best. They endured, they supported each other, and they never gave up. That was the real lesson the Velkari had learned. Not from their data or their measurements, but from the 5 humans who had refused to be broken. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and the harder the lesson, the longer it stays remembered. Hissical. It's in here. He tapped his head. We don't give up, we don't quit, and we definitely don't forget. Jake turned and ran back to the ship. The boarding ramp closed behind him, and he felt the engines engage. The Horizon's Edge lifted off the docking bay floor and shot out into space. They were free. Against all odds, they had escaped. Jake collapsed into his captain's chair, his whole body shaking with adrenaline. Around him, his crew was cheering, laughing, some of them crying with relief. But Jake couldn't celebrate yet. His thumb was swelling badly, and he could feel bruises forming all over his body from the fights and the crawling through vents. They were hurt, exhausted, and traumatized, but they were alive. They had survived, and now it was time to make sure the rest of humanity knew what the Velkari had done. To be their downfall. Jake began to plan. He thought through every detail of the chamber they had just been in, the placement of every control panel and door mechanism. He mentally mapped the route back to the docking bay where the Horizon's Edge was being held. He considered the number of guards, their patterns of movement, their obvious physical limitations. A plan started to take shape. It was risky, maybe even desperate, but it might work. And anything was better than sitting here waiting for the next round of tests. He just needed to communicate the plan to his crew and wait for the right moment. The aliens would give them another chance. They were scientists, addicted to gathering more data. They would want to run more tests on the strange, resilient humans. And when that moment came, Jake and his crew would be ready to show the Velkari exactly what human determination really meant, his temples. But he didn't pass out. He stayed conscious. Even though every instinct screamed at him to just let go and escape into darkness, he thought about his crew, about what they had endured. If they could survive this, so could he. When it was finally over, Jake was taken back to his cell. He collapsed on the floor, every part of his body aching. Through the transparent wall, he could see his crew members. They all looked at him with understanding in their eyes. They knew what he had just been through because they had experienced it themselves. Jake met each of their gazes in turn. Ben gave him a slight nod. Nicole managed a weak smile. Lisa pressed her hand against the wall in a gesture of support. Even Greg seemed more focused now, more present. They had all survived the first round of testing. The aliens had expected them to break, but they hadn't. They had endured. Jake closed his eyes and tried to rest. His body was exhausted, but his mind was racing. He had learned something important today. The aliens were careful with their equipment. They moved gently. And when Greg had punched one of them, the alien had gone down immediately, as if that single blow had caused serious injury. The Velkari were fragile, much more fragile than humans, and that information might be the key to their escape. "I do not make mistakes," Thralkson said. "I am a scientist. I deal in facts and measurements. Whatever you believe about your species, the data will reveal the truth." The alien turned and left the chamber, followed by the others. The lights dimmed slightly, and Jake was left alone in his cell. He could see his crew in their own cells, each one dealing with the situation in their own way. Ben was pacing back and forth. Nicole sat on the floor with her knees pulled up to her chest. Lisa was examining the walls of her cell, looking for any weakness. Greg was starting to wake up in his cell, groaning and holding his head. Jake sat down and took a deep breath. They were in serious trouble. trapped in an alien research facility with no way to call for help. But he was still alive, and so was his crew. Where there was life, there was hope. He just had to figure out how to use that hope before the aliens started their experiments. And based on what Thralkson had said, he didn't have much time.